Wow, you guys got so quiet so quickly. Hello! Welcome everyone to Careers in Psychedelics. Thank you for being here today. All right. Big welcome to both Columbia and external guests for being here as we celebrate some of this field's most impressive minds, I would say. My name is Sydney. I'm head of Teachers College Interdisciplinary Psychedelic Society, also known as TCIPS. And before we begin, I just really like to say thank you to some people without whom this entire evening would not be possible. First and foremost, my executive team, Shoval, our social chair, and Isaac, our director of research and administration. You are truly the best teammates ever. I love you so much. Thank you. To our GSLD advisor, Grace, who's not here with us today, but we freaking love you. To Eva, Brianna, Evan, Anna, George, Jackson, Manuela, Francisco, Megan, and Marcella for your consistent love and support throughout the year. We see you. We'd also love to give a shout out to the School of Social Work Psychedelic Caucus for being here today. Many of you, I know you're out here supporting, so thank you. And then to Joel and Josh, our founders, without this wouldn't happen, and whose shoulders we stand on, so thank you. All right, as we proceed through the panel, yes, we're figuring out some lights. As we proceed through the panel, we definitely invite you to jot down your thoughts, write down your notes. Any questions you have, we are going to open up the floor towards the end, so feel free to connect with them then. And at this time, I would love to invite Alejandro to help us set an intention for this evening by leading us in a mindful prayer. Maybe ground together. Thank you.
From this space, I ask for permission and express my gratitude to the guardians of this territory, to all of the forces that inhabit below the cement, praying to them so that they can come here to help us to comprehend, to open our minds, to open the possibility of a profound listening. And like that, we may materialize this dance between the worlds, this dance of thoughts, of differences, which we are proposing ourselves to weave today. From there, with the whole weaving of our hearts, I pray for a good word. Ayllu.
Thank you, Alejandro, for that beautiful prayer. All right, so let's dive in. Let's get to it. I would love for the speakers to just introduce themselves. What do you do? Maybe organizations or companies you're affiliated with, and perhaps your favorite part of this job. Who would like to start? Dun, dun, dun. Do we want to just go down the line this way? Do you have a mic?
I have a mic now. Okay.
Perfect.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for spending your Friday with us. This is so wonderful to see you all here. Thank you, Sydney, for the invite. My name is Gina Vensel. I am the Community Partnerships Manager at MAPS, and we just celebrated our 40th anniversary, so it's a big milestone. We'll give a round of applause to Rick Goblin and the team before me. I more recently had joined the staff full-time. I have a company called Easy Street Promotions that I've owned for 20 years. And through that, I started working in the cannabis and psychedelic space and could not safely bank with cannabis companies. So I had to start a second company called Plant Media Project, where I would work with my psychedelic and cannabis businesses. Through then, I started working with MAPS on the psychedelic science conferences. I also worked on the Horizons Perspective on Psychedelics conference and many other conferences and events in this space. And then very recently, at the beginning of this year, MAPS invited me full time. So I haven't had a W-2 in a long time, but it's MAPS, and I'm glad to be here, guys. But in my free time, I do drug policy reform with Gina at SSDP. I sit on the board there, and I co-founded the Three Rivers Psychedelic Society in my hometown in Pittsburgh. It's important to me to not just think about this work as like a global work, but also where I live at home. It's pretty highly stigmatized in Pittsburgh. So I want to make sure that my hometown isn't left behind, and really trying to plan some educational events and meetups so that like-minded people can get together in my hometown and learn about psychedelics. So just very grateful to be here. Thank you. Oh, favorite part of my job.
Yes.
Favorite part of my job is being and witnessing the kind of the tissue that lies within our community, the kind of mycelium network, if you will, of like the connectors. And that's what I get to do in my job. I get to work with all these different community organizations and educational institutions and help connect people within the community. And so when I see those connections ignite and see something amazing happen out of it, or like down the road even happen, it really just makes me feel so fulfilled. So we're all a part of this mycelium network, and hopefully we'll be able to make a lot of those connections here tonight.
Woo. Thank you, Gina.
Hello everyone, my name is Kat Lakey, and I'm the founder and director of the Psychedelic Assembly. We're a local membership-supported organization devoted to all things consciousness expansion. We were founded in 2022. We ran a brick-and-mortar psychedelic library and community center in Midtown Manhattan for about 2.5 years. And since we initiated it, we've hosted close to 300 public ticketed events, all related to psychedelics, everything from panels, talks, lectures, to immersive theater, comedy shows, puppet shows. We're really interested in the community building aspect, but also the cultural aspect and educational aspect of these events. And favorite thing about working.
Yes, or your favorite aspect, what excites you?
Probably all of the amazing people that I meet. I've made a ton of friends through running the assembly, and it's all about the people to me, so.
Beautiful, thank you, Kat. Gina? Yes.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here, and it's such an honor to be on a panel with such amazing minds, but really a pleasure to be able to interact with you all at Columbia University. I work with a student organization called Students for Sensible Drug Policy. I'm our Director of Strategy and Development. I work full-time with SSDP for the past couple of years, really focused on our state and federal policy initiatives. We focus on psychedelics, cannabis, harm reduction, drug education, and a lot more I'm sure we'll get into. In my spare time, I run our Psychedelic Advocacy Coalition in North and South Carolina. I'm really dedicated to community and coalition building around this issue, but particularly as a younger person, I started forming and advocating in North Carolina when I was 24 years old, and I joined SSDP when I was 22, even though I had little to no policy experience. So I am, and many other people I know, are a huge testament to what is possible when young people really stick to what they believe and have a vision for. So that's why I'm just particularly excited to be here and see all of you. A couple of other things, I'm on the board of the Pearl Institute, which is one of the MDMA expanded access sites. They're actually in rural North Carolina. I'm on the board of the Warriors Healing Network, and I serve on the North Carolina State Task Force on Veterans Health. And that's an issue that's really personal to me, coming from a military family.
Thank you, Gina. Beautiful.
Good afternoon. My name is Nima Vesa, and I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Zendo Project, where we focus on scaling psychedelic harm reduction services across events around America and around the world. I'm originally from farm country Michigan, Midwest through and through, but I plan on living out my days in New York. And I originally found myself in the psychedelic space through the cannabis, working in pre-regulatory environments and trying to figure out how to solve problems so that people can get the healing opportunity that these different plant medicines can provide us and society. So I've actually coming on my 12th Burning Man this year, and that's how I got acquainted with Zendo. I'm very grateful for the partnership with MAPS, and we've recently become our own independent organization. And I think the thing that I love most about my job is really knowing that we're at the edge of the innovation frontier, and everything that we're doing is new. It takes courage. We're operating in a gray space, and everyone that shows up with both IQ and EQ. And when in 1,000 years, when people look back on when all this history in psychedelics started, it's going to come back to these years, to this decade, with all of us here. So thanks for being at the beginning.
Beautiful, Nima. Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh.
Yes. Yes.
So I'm Natalie Gukastian. I'm a psychiatrist and an assistant professor at the Columbia School of Medicine. So I kind of split my time between the clinical world, where I'm a clinician at our ketamine service in Midtown, soon to be hopefully also a clinical service where we provide psychedelics, assuming things might get approved soon. And in my research, I sort of run clinical trials with psilocybin and related compounds. I got to Columbia about 3 years ago, and prior to that I was at the Hopkins Center for Psychedelic and Consciousness Research, like right when it sort of got up and running and got a bunch of funding. I did a research fellowship under Roland Griffiths, where I ran a clinical trial with psilocybin, looking at the effects in people with anorexia nervosa, and also in people with mood disorders and things like that. So then I moved back here because it was time to come home. I'm from here. So great to be back home. And a thing I enjoy about my job is helping people who have lost a lot of hope sort of find a way to regain some hope.
We're glad you're back here, Natalie. Thank you. Alejandro.
Good evening. My name is Alejandro Sanson. I come from the south of Colombia, in where the Andes meet the jungle. I don't know what I could say about myself. Simply, I've had the opportunity to grow and be raised under the embrace of the elders. I was able to grow in relationship with these other forms of perception of reality. In this point, I find myself leading and caring for a community, with the family, with the plants, with the animals, trying to remember and sustain the most basic things of inhabiting this earth. And because of things of life and prayers of the elders, we have been part of a global alliance for the awakening of memory. The memory of each territory, of its plants and its people. And I believe what I enjoy the most is to be able to weave dimensions with my family, to be able to do it in an intergenerational way.
Very well said. Thank you. Please give a round of applause for all these amazing people. Undoubtedly an impressive group of individuals, but I think the consortium of all of you together, what is so special is that each person represents a different pathway into this field. So to start off, Nima, I'd actually like to start with you, because you're quite the academic. And we have, I would say so. We have quite a few scholars in this room. And just for context, Nima did his bachelor's at MIT. He has 2 masters at both Columbia and Georgetown, so welcome back. And you're currently a doctoral student, right? Or you're finishing up soon? Last year of his PhD. So I would say an impressive scholarly track record there. And yet you said you're also the Chief Technology Officer and head of Zendo Lab, of Zendo Project. That feels like a bit of a leap. Can you help us bridge that gap? How did you start as a student? I know you mentioned Burning Man, but suddenly find your way into the position that you are now.
Well, I'll try to keep this to just a couple of minutes. But I could say follow your heart is a short answer, but if I give the long answer, I started out in sustainability. And through that, I wanted to do stuff in energy, and originally the funding actually got pulled, a lot of what's happened in bio experience. So I moved into healthcare into cannabis, ended up writing the world's first data science textbook for the hemp and cannabis space. And then through some serendipitous opportunities, made it to psychedelics. And I think an ongoing theme that I'll probably come back to is that, especially for anyone who's really interested in getting in the space, it's when you're on the forefront of something, right? When we had to actually figure out how to create my position, we discovered that I'm actually the first chief technology officer of psychedelics, the first CTO of psychedelics, because these positions don't exist. And the thing that really helped me in my academic background from a policy perspective, and brought that into the psychedelic space, is that it helped me to understand where the gaps are in how my job would be formed. And if I just reduce this to 30 seconds, if you're gonna go apply for a normal job in corporate or something else, you are, and we are, there's been tens of hundreds of thousands of people who've gone before you. And that means that lawyers have looked over things, it means that conversations have been had, everything's been templated. But what each of us in this room, I think it's really important to impart, and coming from my own experience, is that as you guys are blazing trails into the psychedelic space, you're gonna be creating roles that have never existed before. So it's gonna be just as important to be psychedelically aware and professionally aware in whatever skill you're bringing, but also, talk to the organization, look through the contracts, read how the role is put together, because this is the first time it's ever happening. And you are just as much creating the templates that are gonna seem obvious in 50 years, but also make sure to protect yourself as these new regulations are coming out, as these new rules, new court decisions. That's gonna impact more than anything the early parts of our careers over the next 10, 20 years until the dust really settles.
So I would love to actually know a little bit more about, you said you put all of these pieces together, and you have quite an eclectic background as well. For anyone that's looking to really create something out of nothing, what did that first conversation look like? Was that a group of people, or did you sit down and have a meditative moment?
It's a great question. Honestly, it came down to just offering a crazy opportunity to volunteer myself and say very vulnerably that I want to do this because I feel that this will help people. And the right person who wants to give you that role, it'll resonate with them. Mm-hmm. And because they're also going to be in the same situation as you. People hiring us are also in an equally awkward position, right? And having that mutual empathy, I think, was one of the key things that enabled me to kind of get a foothold in the space.
Nice. Okay. So then I know that you're now head of Zendo Lab, which you'll be doing quite a bit of research, right?
Yeah, we run our own lab in IRB now to measure the impact of what we're doing. So hopefully more people will want to do it.
Yeah. What is the mission there? If anyone wants to get involved, how would they?
So I'll also be available later, but if you go to zendoproject.org, we're always accepting volunteers and people who want to be sitters, people who want to be trained in the clinician side, people who want to help within the organization. We're open to all of that. You can talk to me afterwards, or you can get the website as well.
Yes, definitely afterwards. We have a big social planned for you all. And in an adjacent lane of research here, Natalie, you might come from maybe a more traditional pathway. You went to medical school, and now you also have your own clinical research lab. Can you actually speak a bit to your earlier days as a student? Did you always know that you were going to get into psychiatry, and especially psychedelic science in that, because it's quite niche?
Yeah, so no, I did not. I remember being like a college student and being very interested in psychedelics. I was very into listening to Terence McKenna talks in particular. That guy's my homie. If you guys ever...
Yes. We love him.
Remember the Psychedelic Salon podcast back in the day. And that was, in the early aughts, back when some of the first papers out of Roland Griffith's lab were coming out, looking at psilocybin and the effects of that in mostly healthy people. And I was deeply interested in some of those bits of research that were coming up. But I sort of still saw it as if I were to ever do something like that, it's only something I could ever do after many decades of being normal and respectable and doing research and like something that's not so terribly taboo. So I was like, I don't know, maybe someday. I always thought I'd be some kind of researcher. I, sort of did a little bit of work in various kinds of labs, and ultimately I found someone who was an MD who was doing really interesting work and still was also working with humans in the clinic and sort of seeing day to day what issues are most pressing in our patients like right now. So I think that's a great sort of background to have. It really informs some of the clinical questions and things I look at in my research. So I was like, I'm not gonna do a PhD, I'm gonna do an MD. I was actually a research assistant here at Columbia in the cardiothoracic surgery lab, of all places, after I came back home. And for a while I thought I was gonna be a surgeon. And
It's quite the twist there.
it was a little bit of a twist, but it's actually not a very unusual twist. It's like a common story that people who are psychiatrists used to want to be surgeons.
Yeah, I've heard.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that and why?
I think it's just something about being very invasive and being into that sort of thing, being into invasive procedures, either physical or psychological ones.
Yeah.
And so I was sort of late in medical school where I realized, like, oh, actually, I do not want to become like my surgical role models here, because I noticed some issues in what I saw them doing, and ultimately I thought, well, I actually really enjoyed my psychiatry rotation. I enjoyed the kind of patients I work with, the kind of colleagues I have, some of the flexibility and freedom that's not really afforded in many other clinical specialties, and sort of cherry on top, if I were to do research, there would be an opportunity to do it in the field of psychedelics, which still seemed like a far off fantasy that wasn't ever going to materialize, or at least not anytime soon. And then I happened to be very fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. But I did sort of, like, when I was applying for residency, rank highly the places where that kind of work was happening. And when I found out that I matched at Hopkins for residency, I was like, well, there's not much else to do in Baltimore except like try to get my foot in the door. So that's what I did. And it worked out very, very luckily.
Yeah, I would absolutely say it worked out for sure.
Yeah, for sure.
Can you tell us more about you said you did your fellowship with Roland Griffiths. Can you tell us more about what your work was there, and how it eventually kind of led you to become the director?
Yeah, so I tried to get my little foot in the door at that laboratory for a couple of years. It was kind of hard because as an intern, you're very, very busy. And like when I tried to approach Roland and Mary Cosamato and others there, they were like, what really could you offer us, because you work 80 hours a week right now? I was like, I don't know, but I'll continue to try to get in here. Eventually I sort of heard from another mentor of mine, Angela Guarda, that Roland was interested in doing a clinical trial on people with anorexia nervosa. Dr. Guarda is an eating disorder specialist who's a wonderful role model and mentor of mine. And the sort of work that was necessary at the time was work that I could slot into whatever little bits of time I had in my schedule. And so I sort of eventually developed that into my fellowship project. And it was a very exciting time to be there. It was a time, even at a place like Hopkins, there was quite a lot of stigma about this kind of research. The folks who were doing that work were kind of siloed, socially, but also geographically in this weird little campus that's far away from the main campus. And perceptions about the research group were like not especially favorable, but then we got a new chair, and then we were getting all this media attention thanks to the work of like Roland and Matt Johnson and Al Garcia and all the folks Fred Barrett, who were there for a while. It was just a very exciting time to be there. A lot going on, a lot of interested people from the media trying to call and get our perspective on things, and it was just a really unique time and place in history to have been there. But it was really a place where I learned a lot and carried forward some of what I learned there to what I do now.
Yeah. Now, I think, if I have a sneaking suspicion, there are quite a few students in here that would like to get their, as you said, your little foot in the door.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for them?
Send me an email.
You heard it from
Look me
you
up
heard it here.
in the directory and email me. And tell me why you want to work with me and what you intend to do and what you're interested in. But I think that was sort of one of the prep questions, right? Is like, well, what are we looking for? That sort of thing. What I'm looking for is a competent, conscientious person who's great to work with, who follows through, who's an excellent communicator, and who has some applicable skills. So, can do some statistical work, or has some other kind of background that could be useful in clinical research in particular. First and foremost, we just want people who are like great at what they do. The interest in psychedelics is kind of secondary. It's cool to have, but not always doesn't always make for the best most capable or effective person even sometimes. So just first and foremost being really, really good and having skills that apply to the kind of work at hand.
Nice. Well, you heard it here first, people. If you want to get in with Natalie's lab, feel free to email us. We can send you her information or look her up online. Sounds like an amazing opportunity. Natalie, your work really speaks to the role of evidence in shaping this field, and in many ways, it's not the only path to do that for the public at large. Gina Giorgio, I'd love to actually bring you into the conversation here as well, because I know you do a lot of work in policy and advocacy, from lobbying in DC to speaking at the United Nations itself. So I would love to start with, what does your day-to-day look like for those of us that don't know what you do, and how did you get involved with SSDP?
I love this question. I mean, my days look either like I get up, I'm on my computer for 10 hours, or I'm at a really cool event like this. And I feel like there's not much in between. So our day could be like, we're on a call to plan a press conference in DC to release federal cannabis prisoners, or we're trying to set up a new SOP for the organization, or we're having a call with a new community partner, or we're onboarding a new student organization that's interested. And I think that's one of the amazing things about SSDP, is that it's so hands-on for young people. It's designed to take on new and young volunteers. So that was initially how I started, which was, I was actually not a student. I was working at Wake Forest School of Medicine in the genetics research lab, looking at the genetics of diet-induced obesity. And a couple of years prior to that, I had learned about psychedelics through a documentary. I was on a mental health trajectory, and it was just very clear by seeing the transformative experiences that people were having from psychedelics that that was the field that health was going into. And so that's why I decided to go into research, but ultimately why I decided to join Students for Sensible Drug Policy, because I Googled, how do you work in psychedelics? And SSDP and MAPS showed up, and I was like, this isn't really a job that people have, and I don't know anyone who is interested in psychedelics. So it was a lot of just figuring it out, and then you sort of end up, I think you talk about it enough that you end up at things like this. But initially, my first role was that we had a program through SSDP called the Psychedelic Pipeline. It was a mentorship program for students who were interested in psychedelic careers, primarily clinical therapy and research, and you would get directly matched up with a mentor who had that career. So I was actually matched up with a woman who worked in communications for MAPS. I ultimately went on to get a master's in communications, where I researched how psychedelics are portrayed in the media. But because I'm interested in this direct correlation between storytelling, media, communications, and how that ultimately influences our psychedelic policy and advocacy, I don't think I need to explain drug prohibition to you all, but a lot of that was driven by, sensationalized media. And so I think that part of the reason that we've moved this effort so far is because of the really targeted and strategic storytelling that has taken place over the many decades. On top of, it's the research and the evidence and the safety and the work of many, but also how do you change people's minds through narrative and media ultimately? How are you, tapping into a different audience?
That is definitely the question, isn't it? And I feel like there's probably no better person to talk about psychedelics being in the media right now, and I'm sure many of you have probably heard recently, but Trump's recent presidential executive order to accelerate psychedelic research and access. I'm curious, now putting party politics aside here, do you have any thoughts on this? Like, how is this going to change our landscape? What do you foresee happening?
I have a lot of thoughts. A lot of that are probably going to change constantly over time, but we had heard some whispers a couple days before that President Trump might sign this executive order. I was skeptical that something might happen immediately. So I saw with you all Saturday morning that happened. I had the privilege of being on a panel the next day with Brian Hubbard, so we got more of the scoop of how that actually played out. And so I watched that in real time while he was explaining it. So, first and foremost, aside from, I'm not endorsing any political side or candidate, but the main thing that stood out to me was that the topic of psychedelics just reached the national public in a way that I don't think it ever has before. And so, for better or for worse, who was representing that, that was just mind-blowing to me, that now I, immediately went and sent that article and that live stream to people where we've been portraying that this is something we've been advocating for, and look, now it's being recognized at the national level. I saw today that the FDA issued national priority vouchers to 3 psychedelics. So that was something they said they would do last week, and that's something that they actually did today. That was for 2 psychedelic compounds and for 1 MDMA compound. I believe that this will actually move at a more expedited rate than other things did, or other types of drugs or initiatives, but primarily because I don't think that this move happened because Joe Rogan called the president and was like, let's have a meeting. I think that it actually took years of people going to DC and advocating for people that are close to the administration. And there's people that are extremely dedicated. All the people up here are dedicating their lives to psychedelics, and there's many people who are trying to do that in DC. So one, I'm thankful for the people who have come before me to make this work a possibility. I think to be determined how this will play out, but it's also a positive signal that the government's willing to put federal money towards psychedelic clinical trials.
Absolutely. And you hit the nail on the head, I think, when you said that it kind of just looks like this happened, but it's been years in the making. Can you give us an inside look as to what that actually looked like? Like, I'm sure too much to explain here, but what are we really talking about? And really to say, if people wanted to get involved with policy and advocacy, is there a place for them to do that? Where should they go?
Great question. And I think this exists on many different levels. So people ask me a lot, how do I get involved in psychedelic policy and advocacy? And one, I'll say, you don't have to talk to your lawmaker, but even just having a conversation with one other person can plant a seed. And I think that that's initially how we got to this point, was a lot of people being willing to be open and honestly vulnerable. Like, a lot of people are sharing their most vulnerable stories and experiences publicly, and that has really resonated emotionally with lawmakers and decision makers. Part of it is also that, we have different treatments such as talk therapy and SSRIs, and there's just different options that do work for some people, but there's so many that the treatments are falling short for. And I think we've just gotten to this point where whether that lawmaker has had their own mental health experience or someone close to them has suffered, they see that what we have right now isn't working for a lot of people. And so there's some empathy behind moving this forward in a positive way. For all of you, there's a lot of ways you can get involved. One of the best things I think you can do is what you're doing right now, which is showing up to events and introducing yourself and sharing what you're interested in. Showing up is the biggest thing. You talked about this, but being innovative, having creative ideas, but also being willing to implement those. This is a field that is constantly emerging and changing every single day. It's sometimes hard to keep up, but it's the people who are willing to take a risk and a chance on their creative and forward-thinking idea. So there's a lot of ways to get involved with SSDP. We have a psychedelic committee, a harm reduction committee, a science policy committee. So feel free to talk to me and also go to our website. But aside from SSDP, if you're interested on the policy front, talking to your lawmaker, giving a call, but especially going in person to their office and telling them why you're interested in this, it takes many passes to kind of get the attention of someone. And so being persistent, I think, has gotten us pretty far.
Yes, that's a remarkable landscape of opportunities that you just laid out there for us. And Gina, your work also overlaps with another lovely Gina on our panel, Gina Vensel. I know you like the segue there. Gina, you hold managerial and directorial positions at both MAPS and SSDP. But something I remember you talking about when we first met was how you made an organization in your 20s. And I would be bold to say, and I don't think too bold, but you're quite literally the definition of an entrepreneur in this field. So can you tell us a little bit about what that business was, what its mission is? Yeah, let's dive in. I'm curious.
Yeah, thank you. Join SSDP if you care about this stuff. I need to give a plug because I honestly, there's just so much to digest in this movement. But follow your heart to what guides you. When we talk about cannabis, there's one plant. But when we talk about psychedelics, there's so many different compounds. And so really find the medicine that speaks to you and, do the work there. And so when I got started, I'm an events producer, as I mentioned, by trade. And, when I graduated from college, I had a poetry writing degree. Like, there's no wanted ads in the newspaper for that. I mean, I had no idea what I was gonna do. So I started thinking about creating a life of my own design and what that actually could look like. And so my first professional job was working at the Alternative News Weekly in Pittsburgh. And I started working, in advertising and meeting all the different local business owners and learning from small business owners and seeing how they run their business, how they do things. And I had a love for music and always have. And so I felt that music was really the bridge towards the drug policy reform that I was doing, because I was able to have concerts to raise money for funds to support cannabis reform, or let's have a concert to raise awareness about XYZ. It was a lot of women's rights issues, LGBTQ issues. And so it was like using music in special events to raise awareness was like a big key. But I was a young person, I was the first person in my family to ever go to college. Certainly never would have thought I could be an entrepreneur or even knew what that meant. But I learned that the bank would allow me to start a bank account with $50 if I had a DBA name. And so I went to the state of Pennsylvania and came up with the name Easy Street Promotions. And I took my $50 and I started my bank account. And then I got business cards and a MySpace account, if anyone can remember that. And so I was able to promote these events and do these things using social media. It was very new then. And use that, and with just, I paid all my bands, I paid all my artists, I never made any money, so I had to keep my full-time job, but I kept Easy Street on the side. And after several years, I became the marketing director at the paper, and realized that a lot of these folks that were working with me didn't really want to buy the advertising anymore. They really just wanted these special events and these creative opportunities and activations that I was coming up with. So I, at that point, was mid-20s and decided to start an LLC, get my ducks in a row. And one of the most important things I learned is that you need to have an accountant. Really important, because as a small business owner, there's so many moving parts, and you have to keep track of your money and make sure you're paying your taxes and making sure you're keeping up with everything. I got business insurance right away, even as a young person. Learned that, I'm going to throw concerts and parties, and there might be drugs there, and you don't know what's going to happen. And the Rave Act had just gotten passed that said that it would be the responsibility of the business owner if somebody came into your facility and, let's say, overdosed on drugs. And there was not really harm reduction back at clubs back then in the 80s, 90s. This wasn't happening. So when I decided to okay, I'm working on these events, I'm seeing that this is happening, how do I make a move towards what I love, which was plant medicine specifically? It was cannabis and mushrooms. But again, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, no one's talking about this. So I threw the very first fundraiser for Pittsburgh NORML, the National Organization for the Reformation of Marijuana Laws, which was 15 years ago in Pittsburgh, and have been fighting for cannabis reform in my state ever since. Then the pandemic happened, and all events shut down, and I had a moment of pause, and I have a child, and she was just going into first grade. And so I went from being this crazy workaholic, had a million things going on during the day, at night, to being stuck at home with a child, a stay-at-home mom that I never thought myself to be. And so I reconnected with mushrooms and started microdosing, and it really helped me during that time. And I started researching a lot and read work like Dr. Natalie's work. This is, wow, how did all of this happen? How was I missing that this is back, and that this isn't just this illicit substance or something that's underground, that there's all this education that should get out there, and there's all this work that could be done. So I made a promise to myself that after the pandemic, if events ever came back, that I would make a mission to myself that I would produce events that were specifically dedicated to moving this movement forward. And so I was very lucky to get hired at Horizons. Remember the first event that I did, we had to COVID test everyone before they came into the New York Academy of Medicine. It was a really strange time, but we were glad to have events back. And then since then, I've been really, really lucky to be able to stay focused and really continue to do work in this space. But it was not an easy journey, and it was something that I had to really do. Sometimes I was working crazy jobs. I had to take some, insane projects that really wasn't what I loved to do in order to pay the bills. But I continued to do it, sometimes working, nights, weekends, maybe giving up a little bit of my social life. But when your business is producing events, it kind of merges together a lot. So you're having fun, you're doing fun, so you don't mind working so hard, but kind of keeping that mission that if I can create a life of my own design, it would be one that the work that I do is deeply rooted in the actual passion that I have for the advocacy. And so I now find myself at MAPS in this position where I get to work on special events and work with the community and be really dedicated to this work. And I'm feeling very, very honored for this opportunity. And I hold it with a lot of intention. As we talk in the psychedelic space, you set your intentions for something before you would ever do a journey. Well, now I'm on the journey, and then maybe we'll have a meeting like this and talk about the integration after all y'all get into psychedelics, because it really is a wild ride, and you have to take it one step at a time. But if you follow what interests you most, probably the best thing a mentor said to me, because I have no letters next to my name, I'm not a researcher, how am I gonna get into psychedelics? How could I get into this community? And it was a mentor that said to me, do what you do best and then apply it to this new industry. So here I am as an events producer, now being able to be a part of psychedelics because I stayed true to who I am, and then I brought that to the industry.
That's beautiful. Thank you for that. I would honestly say that one of your talents, next to discipline and clearly hard work, is community building. And you've done this in multiple different ways, not only internationally, but also in your hometown, I believe. Can you speak a little more to that organization? And also, do you have any tips and tricks, perhaps, for people out here that are coming? I know a couple people have traveled here, are looking to start communities in their hometown. How might they start networking or building those bridges that are really far-reaching across the country?
I love this. Yeah, there was nothing in my hometown related to psychedelics. So we try to, because I know that Psychedelic Assembly says find the others as well. It's become kind of like a phrase then in the psychedelic space. You can look and find people that are interested in you. How do we do this? Okay, let's throw a meetup. Let's start a meetup page and see who in Pittsburgh will sign up. Next thing you know, we have 800 people on the meetup. We don't know who these people are yet, but they all say they care about psychedelics. So let's host a meeting, let's see who comes. And then I'm seeing this intergenerational group of people that were in college, undergraduates, all the way to in their 70s, 80s-year-olds, all coming together because of psychedelics. And so we are going through the process to get our 501c3 right now. Our organization is called the Three Rivers Psychedelic Society, or TRIPS is our acronym. And we have been, hosting online educational events, meetups. We do hiker doses where we'll do walk and talks through the woods together and different things like that. And it's really been a way to make deep friendships with people that I would have never been connected with in my community, but the psychedelics brought us together. Now there's an organization called the Global Psychedelic Society, and if you go to their website, they have a map that shows you all of the psychedelic societies around the world. So if you're traveling to some place and you want to connect with people, or you want to see if there's something that already exists in your hometown, that's a really good resource to go to the GPS and take a look at their map and see if there's something there. So there might already be a group near you that exists, but let's say that there doesn't, and you have to start from scratch. I would say, again, same thing with the $50 in a bank account. You find a coffee shop, you find a park and put a blanket out there. All you need to do is put it on Facebook, promote it to a couple friends. And even if you start with 5 people, those 5 people say, hey, I went to this psychedelic event. Can you believe it that they had that in our hometown? And then that starts to spread. But you have to be consistent with it, because there's so many things going on in the world. Everyone's really busy. But if you have consistency, so we started doing in-person integration sessions. And so we have a psychotherapist in our group this is what he wants to contribute. So every other week, he meets at the same coffee shop at the same time. And so there are people that do not use social media that know that they can show up and that Bill will be there for those integration circles. So consistency, definitely making sure that you do not need a big budget, but that you come up with some sort of way for you to meet in person. And Zoom events are fine too. Sometimes when people are new to meet each other, especially when they're talking about illicit substances, we always try to start with creating a safe space. You don't want to incriminate yourself. These are Schedule I drugs. And so a big part of TRIPS is really making sure that the community understands the rules and the laws. There were a lot of flashy headlines on Saturday that have been spread all around about this executive order that are misleading, that make people believe that psychedelics are now decriminalized. And that is a lie. And I hope that we can get there, but we're not there yet. And so when you get a group of people together in an area that may have stigma, like my hometown, and you want people to talk openly, there has to be a level of trust. And so we start small, we get to know the people in the group. We started a Discord channel, or Discord. Not everybody loves it, but it's been a way for us to keep track of, like, here's news articles, here's information. So a lot of people come in passive, where they just read the resources that we're sharing and they don't really come and participate right away. We just did an online event last week, and a gentleman said that he had been in the Discord for over a year and that this was the first event that he had come to. So it takes people some time. So be consistent with it. I'm gonna be here at the after event, come up and talk to me. I'd be delighted to help you. We can look up online, see if there's anything in your hometown or near you that does exist. But really kind of starting from scratch and just having some consistency may be all that it takes. But just make sure that you start this organization or this meetings with a deep sense of trust. Because when people start just making a list of all the drugs that they've done, it's really not healing. It just feels like people kind of competing for who did more compounds. And I don't think that that really needs to be the way that we are building community. It needs to be meeting people where they're at. And then also recognizing if someone has substance use issues or severe mental issues, that you address that and you talk to them about that. Because then you start to have a responsibility as someone organizing with folks that if you see someone's going down a really dark path and you don't say something about it. We've had members of our community get arrested, have psychotic breaks. Well, we were aware. We contacted their wife. We helped with their, get dinner for their kids. We knew as a community that something had happened. And that's really what this is community care. It doesn't have to be a big fancy organization, but it's about caring for your neighbors and caring about each other and coming together for a like mind. We all care about psychedelics, so how can we come together and support one another for things beyond psychedelics? We can't give someone that is houseless mushrooms and think it's gonna cure them. They're not gonna get a house now, right? So if somebody in your community is suffering, maybe help them if they have food insecurity or they have something like that. We do a lot of potlucks and we let people know you don't have to bring anything if you can't. Just come and eat with us, break bread with us. And that builds the trust to build community.
I love what you said there about breaking bread. I would say another expert person here at Building Community and Breaking Bread is none other than the Kat Lakey. Phenomenal and critical, I think, to building the New York City psychedelic community. Perhaps less known, though, is your background in video making. For those of you that don't know, Kat's actually made The Greatest Speech Ever Made, which is a video that went viral, has over 17 million views on YouTube. And I think it's gotta be translated in like over 20 different languages. So keeping in mind your background in multimedia and video making, was that something that you always knew was gonna bring you into the field? What was that start like for you, and how did that eventually evolve to where you are today?
Yeah, not at all. I first got into psychedelics when I was 17 years old, so almost 20 years ago. And it profoundly changed my life. I was obsessed with them from the get-go and knew I wanted to do something with them in the long term, but this would have been 2007 maybe. There really weren't a whole lot of above ground professions in the psychedelic field unless you devoted yourself to academia, and that never really resonated with me. So I did a lot of odd jobs at first. I worked at a lot of restaurants, bookstores, doing retail, coffee shops, a lot of service jobs, and taught myself video editing because I was interested in it. Initially just stitching video clips to old Terrence McKenna lectures that I found really poignant or prophetic. And I found this old speech of Charlie Chaplin's from the film The Great Dictator and stitched some modern imagery to that because it had a very psychedelic message in my mind, and it went weirdly viral in 2011. But I continued being interested in psychedelics. I moved to California in 2012, working more service jobs until I had a pretty severe mental health crisis in 2014, which actually led me to moving down to Peru, where I worked in the Madre de Dios region of the Amazon at a small ayahuasca center for 3 years, where I was apprenticing to become an ayahuasquera. So I studied traditional plant medicine there until 2020 when the pandemic hit, and we got stuck in the Amazon, and through a bunch of weird circumstances ended up in New York. It's a long story. Yeah.
Speaking of ending up in New York here, I would say Psychedelic Assembly has made a massive impact on this city. And something I couldn't really help but notice is that almost your entire executive team is led by women. Is that something that organically emerged? Was that intentional? And do you think that that's impacted the way that this society has been built?
Yeah, I mean, it emerged because my two co-founders are two of my best friends. Abby Lyle, I met her through the organization Decrim Nature. When I first moved to New York, I was lonely and just looking for other psychedelic people. It was peak COVID, so there weren't really a whole lot of other events going on. And we just hit it off right away. And then my other co-founder, Susie, had come down to an ayahuasca retreat at the center I was working at, and we became friends down there. So yeah, it just sort of naturally aligned, and the three of us joined forces. And yeah, I think it's interesting to be an all-female led organization. Like we tend not to let our egos get in the way of things. There's a lot of cooperation and listening to each other, and just trying to lead by instinct, I guess.
Definitely. I think that a lot of us here can probably feel that from Psychedelic Assembly, especially through your events. But shifting gears now from maybe the New York community to maybe one that's more global, Alejandro, for those that are less familiar with your culture and your work, can you tell us a little bit more about which plant medicines you use and your culture's spiritual approach to them?
In the territory in which I grew up, it is a territory that is a bridge territory between the mountains of the Andes and the jungle. A lot of ecosystems are interwoven as well. Culturally, it has been a point of encounter, a meeting point. So when I grew up there, we grew up under the blanket of the yaje, ayahuasca. Nonetheless, many nations around us have been in processes of a recuperation of their own memory. In those processes, alliances have been woven which have allowed to broaden that spectrum of these tools or these teacher plants. So territorially, as our own force, is tobacco, coca, Huachuma or San Pedro, and Willka. Those are the medicines that converge there, which were cared for by the knowledge of the nations of Yahe. However, given that cultural convergence and the purposes of alliances which our nations have established, the possibility has arrived of a vast basket. In that, a nation appeared, which comes from the depth of the Colombian Amazon of Paupés. They come from a place in which we have to take an airplane to this one town, and then we walk for about 2 months in order to be able to arrive to the place from where they came out. When they got out of that because of violence, they ended up in the city and are woven to this alliance. In that, they brought a very interesting knowledge, which they call the anaconda canoe or the canoe of knowledge. in which different tools come. The elders recommend us not to call those tools medicine, because in the Western mind, there is the idea that a medicine is something that you take and heals you. For us, these forces do not work like that. We call them tools because they come as a tool, so that we, under our own consciousness, we can do the work that is necessary to do with them. They are spirits that lend themselves in that way. So when we speak about that canoe of knowledge, it is a story, a very ancient myth, in which the memory of different tools is recollected. The elders say that it goes beyond those mere tools that are named within the canoe, because in that story they speak about this reality and they say that it is madness. For the elders, madness is to spin in circles over one same idea without being able to advance. So the elders say, in this world of all of this madness, everything spins and everything gets you dizzy. In that myth, it is said that for us to be able to give a step beyond that dizziness, we have to learn how to be dizzy. So as a gift, it is said that that circle of the existence of the human being is divided into 10 pieces, in 10 aspects of that dizziness. And each one of those aspects descends upon those 9 tools, 9 containers, which receive that information. They allow us to learn how to be dizzy in order to be able to find the center of that dizziness. That is a very long story, but within those 9 tools, we find smoked tobacco, we find the coca leaf, we find murundi, or the tobacco that is blown, and the tobacco that is eaten like ambil. Then comes a tool, which is the first one that ruptures the veil of time, abenuri, the penis of the sun, which are mushrooms. Then comes a tool of which we're not really allowed to speak about. It is the one that safeguards the knowledge of the kingdom of death, Tihiki, or Toe, or angel's trumpet. Then come the 3 queens of knowledge, which are Jemuru, the tobacco of the warrior, the tobacco which ruptures the veil of time and allows us to give a step beyond madness. That in which in these territories you know as cannabis. Then comes Bihini, which is the force of the vision of the sun. It is commonly known as Yopo or Willka. And lastly, it is Dagpi, or Yahe ayahuasca. That canoe is the story which these elders of that nation, Tubu, they come and share to us within that alliance. So in our nations, we have walked that alliance, understanding the complexity of this time and the necessity of having all of that fan of possibilities,
sí, para aprender a
in order to
caminar
learn to walk
en medio de este teatro.
in the middle of all of this theater.
Sí, entonces ahí está un poco, ¿no?
So
Esa
there is a little bit of that
memoria que se nos ha sido
memory which has been
compartida y
shared
que
to
hemos
us and that we
sostenido
have
dentro de la
sustained
alianza
within the alliance
en relación a estas
in
herramientas,
relationship to these tools,
sí, que nos permiten ver un poquito
which
más
allow
allá,
us
¿no?
to see a little bit beyond.
That's beautiful. I almost want to clap for you there. I think a lot of us just learned a lot about your culture and tradition that we may not have. I'm curious because as this is careers in psychedelics, if we want to come into your culture and learn about it in a way that's done with respect and cultural humility, how would you suggest we do that?
For us, the whole movement that comes from the ancient memory, we move in base to the codes, those codes of origin are manifested upon different seats. 4 seats mainly. The symbols, the stories, the songs, and the dances. Those 4 seats are the ones that allow us to comprehend the world and to walk it. From our stories, it is spoken about this time and about this necessity to be bridge people, to learn to weave ourselves from the difference. So with this, I want to say that it is a mandate from our tradition to relate ourselves amongst these differences. It is a mandate to learn to complement each other. That we have to learn to do it from respect. Respect always begins with listening to the other, with opening oneself up to allow that all of that which the other is can traverse us. And after that has happened, the elders say we filter. We recollect the essence of that communication. So I would say that the most respectful way for people that are not from our culture to approach that culture, it is that attitude of listening. An attitude of listening which means not to listen pretending or wanting to give an answer to what the other person is saying. Because truly the elders say that the communication is an illusion, that really every one of us is understanding what we want to understand all the time. So they tell us it is not about wanting to understand each other, rather of comprehending and to sustain ourselves from there. I believe that there I could add to that the importance to remember. To remember, for example, how is it that these medicines or these tools arrived to our time, to our context, to the cities? Sometimes we believe that that just happened, and it is not like that. There was a lot of blood, there was a lot of death, genocide, slavery, a lot of really strong things which the nations and the wise ones had to cross in order to be able to bring us these gifts to this time. And that is something that we cannot forget. Sometimes we fall into the easiness of the modern world, in the rush. And in that rush, we forget to sit down to remember. As my elder used to say, we want instant chocolate, instant coffee, and now we want instant shamans. We want everything to be like that. So in order to truly respect, we have to remember. Let's see if these elders dare to bring all of this, if they paid with their lives and with their blood. What is the information that they also bring? Let's not separate the plant from the information that accompanies it, its story, its song, its dance, in order to be able to respect and to dare to comprehend the other. There it's important also to recognize the human story of that process. Because all of this expansion of the visionary plant happened because the elders prayed for it. In the 50s and later in 1974, 64, the elders came together in the jungle, in the mountains, in the deserts. And all of them knew how to see what was coming. They prayed. They did their work, they made their magic. They took that decision. It's okay. Let these tools or this tool to come out. Because the family and the world needs it. And from then on, these are very long stories with a lot of details as to how all of that happened. So if we speak about approaching with respect, it is important to know the story of the other. That is the first way of respect, the first form of respect. To dare to want to know the other. How is it that it is here? What is it? And that with the nations, but also with the spirit of these plants. I could speak about the plants. I don't know about the substances. There I have dared to try one or two things. But what's in our basket is woven to the spirit, which lies in these plants and opens those doors. That's what I could say.
I kind of want to build on what you were talking about in terms of listening to each other and building on these bridges. I would like to invite Nima and Natalie into conversation with Alejandro here, because in many ways, all of you represent very different forces shaping the field. Alejandro is talking about bringing forth this wisdom that the ancestors have entrusted in him, and you both work in research, and in many ways, you're looking towards the future and innovation. I'm curious, how, in your opinion, can you foresee researchers and those in labs in the forefront being in constant conversation with these more maybe indigenous cultures, these very profound ways of understanding these plants? Where do you see anything conflicting or perhaps being in harmony? What do you think?
Complicated question.
Indeed. Apologies.
It's a hard question to answer. I think Alejandro and I were talking sort of briefly about this, that sometimes there's lip service paid to listening to indigenous voices that doesn't really result in much in the way of results. Certainly not results that end up benefiting those communities. I think there's also danger in treating indigenous people as a monolith, right? There are different cultures involved in that, different approaches to using some of the substances that we're talking about. and it requires quite a bit of humility, I think, to kind of approach a person and try to learn from them, right? Especially within dynamics in which some of those cultures have been harmed as a result of the cultures that we belong to. So I don't know. It's a very hard thing to do. I can't say that I've been the best at it, right? I sort of live in my own little corner of the research universe, and my work isn't always clearly relating to indigenous practices, right? But I sort of try to acknowledge, right, where some of that came from. But so I think it just requires a lot of care, right? And people who have the time and respect for other people, but also requires, I think, the interests of those communities in talking with us, right? Maybe not everything is meant to be shared, as Alejandro was saying. There's some things that are just like we don't talk about, and it's not for us to really know about. Yeah, I mean, what do you think, Nima?
I think, well, first of all, thank you both for sharing on that side. And I think that this comes down to something, it relates to kind of the other side of what I was talking about earlier, which is that, you know, there are no rules for this kind of new frontier we're breaking into. And just like how I mentioned earlier that there's no playbook for any of us in this room for, you know, that's been settled on like how people are treated, like how the industry is built, like how you're going to be employed, and what are those rules as we're kind of moving through this ambiguous gray market space, more literally. There's also similarly reality that we have to come up with new ways to think about how to incorporate and honor the indigenous peoples and consciousness into this path forward. And right now, you know, research has been very transactional. Right? You check for some results, you look for an impact, you see if there's a statistically significant difference, and you traditionally call it a day. But I think it's going to behoove us as a community of researchers and practitioners to really listen to the origins and the custodians of these tools. And I'm really grateful you said tools, because that's something I brought up on a panel on Saturday. It's like these are not like, they can be used as cures and they can be used as therapies, but these are tools and they cut both ways. If you don't honor and respect the tool, at a personal level, it will maybe not cut you the way that you like. And if as a community we don't honor and respect these tools, then the hope that we have for the healing that they can bring to community and society at large, I think in best case will slow down, and the worst case will bite us in the butt. So let's pay attention to each other. Let's realize we're going into a new form of distribution, of education, and the rules of today that may not encompass everyone, not just spatially, but across time, are still being written by everyone here.
Definitely. I really like what you said about kind of crossing into another space. And I do think that a couple of your colleagues on this panel here are quite expert at that, especially in governmental spaces. So I'd actually like to bring Gina Giorgio and Gina Vencel and still Natalie into this conversation, because in SSDP, I know that you just had a case against the DEA, if I'm correct, and at New York State Psychiatric Institute, it's half Columbia owned and half government owned. So in your opinion, kind of along the same threads, how do you negotiate with these big governmental institutions who may be quite resistant to change or maybe even slow to? What language do you use? I'm curious.
That's a big question. I mean, especially when you're talking about the peak of drug bureaucracy, which is the DEA. So I'm happy to give some context behind that. But in 2022, the Drug Enforcement Administration made a motion to recommend scheduling of DOI and DOC which, if you're not familiar, they're two psychedelic research compounds. So they act on the body's serotonin system in ways that are similar to psilocybin. But unlike psilocybin, DOI and DOC are not Schedule 1. They're actually unscheduled substances that are used primarily, as I mentioned, in research as a way to, specifically in animal models, gauge how psychedelics might also be acting in humans. The DEA motioned to schedule those to Schedule 1 in 2022, and it was actually the students from SSDP who petitioned against the DEA, got that motion dropped. The DEA refiled that, and it was through, I want to give a shout out to a lot of people, but Elijah Ullman from SSDP reads the DEA's Federal Register, and that's how he saw that DOI and DOC were proposed to be scheduled. And it was through Elijah, who was a PhD student at Emory, Joe Hennessy, Elena Jaster, Tanner Anderson, all PhD students and postdocs who, coordinated the expert testimony, worked with Brett Phelps and Robert Rush to file the paperwork. That was, a small nonprofit initiative led by students. In that case, got us in person in court against the DEA. That was the first time the DEA has had a psychedelic scheduling hearing since MDMA was scheduled in 1986. So I remember when this idea was presented to us, I didn't know what DOI was. I would have never imagined that we would have gotten that far. And so I actually sat in court. We were projected to be there for a whole week. I sat in court for a week. I saw our students up on the stand against the DEA's attorneys and expert witnesses. A lot of people have different, to your question, ideas about, how do you negotiate with the government? People have different ideological stances on that, which is one, you don't negotiate with the system that's, often not supportive of the little people. In that case, we had a completely different stance than the DEA. We don't think that DOI and DOC should be scheduled at all. And with the stance of SSDP, we advocate for the decriminalization of all drugs. We don't think that people should be punished for drugs. And that might or may not sound crazy. And I think a lot of my opinions have shifted through this organization. But, why are we punishing people for doing drugs and not, eating food or taking something that's poisonous? This way that we've set up this system isn't designed to support people. Instead, you're just locking people away for something that really shouldn't be a moral or ethical issue. So I would say a lot of this is, not just negotiating with the government, but trying to get them to see drugs and people who use drugs in a completely different way. So you brought up the UN before. I had the pleasure of going to the United Nations Commission on Narcotic Drugs in March of this year, and I was honestly shocked to hear a lot of the countries that were represented there don't view people who do drugs as human. But that was way more of a common notion than I would have expected. We come from an organization that focuses on harm reduction, ultimately the safety of people, not the imprisonment of people. I think a lot of this is, we don't want to negotiate when it comes to the safety and well-being of other people. And I think it's just a constant, honest, long-term push and just educating people on, this is beyond psychedelics, but and beyond the medical usage of them, but just an approach to how do we view drugs in general. And I'll say just lastly on the point of psychedelics that this is so much broader than just the medicalization or legalization of psychedelics. There's so many applications and they've been used for decades and decades. And I hope that we can shift the paradigm around psychedelics for mental health or for healing, but really as a way to reach your full potential and just the betterment of people and humanity.
Definitely. Dina, do you have any thoughts on that too?
And just one thing to add there, one thing that SSDP kind of coined the phrase now was research harm. And that had never really been, spoke to in that way. So by the DEA placing these two psychedelic research chemicals that we've never heard of on the street, this is not a drug that anyone's doing. It has a very specific use case in research. And so therefore, by placing them on Schedule 1, you are halting this research and you're halting science. So these amazing PhD candidates that were deep in the thick of having all of the information that the DEA like was honestly, I think, taken back by these amazing students that came forth. And I was just so proud to see SSDP pop up in the news. A student-led organization sues the DEA. Those are the headlines we want to see, that young people can move mountains, can do things. And many of the folks that were involved in this had never done anything like this before. But the frameworks of organizations like SSDP help you, Elijah came to us with this piece, and wow, okay, very quickly it was like, okay, we have attorneys that can help, we have an infrastructure, we have a team that can make social media graphics, we have a team that can organize the press conference, and then all of a sudden, all of these people are working together, and we saw it make national news. And I was so proud to be a part of it in a little way, being able to help with the press conference and us holding up our signs in front of the DEA headquarters. But the work's gonna continue to happen. We're seeing more and more drugs being scheduled, and that's not what we wanted SSDP. Specifically, we, like Gina said, that's why I mentioned about the flashy headlines with the executive order as well. People are still being imprisoned for using drugs, whether it's cannabis. I think in 2024, the report was like 200,000 Americans are being thrown in jail for cannabis. And we're gonna see even more people thrown in jail for psychedelics if they don't understand these new rules. They're gonna put themselves potentially in danger by being too open about it. So we're at this really unique time in history where we wanna be excited. We want you to talk to your friends and your family about psychedelics, but coming out of the psychedelic closet can have implications. And while we're still kind of fighting these, laws, something like this with the DEA was historic. Like Gina said, it hadn't happened since, MDMA in 1986. So we're looking 40 years now, and here we're back, and now you're going after research chemicals? These aren't even drugs that people are doing on the street. So, reading the DEA, what did you say, like newsletter or whatever, he was in the thick of it. I'm sure that when you have, when you're a student and you're really into it, if something comes to you that seems not right and you have a feeling about it, reach out to your network, because just that one call from Elijah spun into this massive campaign. But if he wouldn't have known where to go or didn't know what to say with it, he knew that this was something that should get the attention. And so this idea that research harm is something that we need to consider is really important as we fight the war on drugs.
Gotcha. And yeah, you want to add something?
I will add that the DEA has still not scheduled DOI and DOC, so we've been able to keep pushing that off for the few years. But just along the implication of our drug scheduling system just doesn't make sense. So, we're fighting for something bigger than DOI and DOC, but the potential for the DEA to continue to schedule drugs and prohibit in this way.
I'm wondering, Kat, if I could bring you into conversation with both of these lovely ladies too. When we're not really talking to the institutional level and we're building community day to day, in these little interactions, what patterns have you seen really helps? And have you seen anything that can maybe quietly erode a community, even in just New York City?
Yeah, I think it's a big piece of what works and what helps is just being welcoming to everyone, being the type of community space that people feel comfortable coming into, and regardless of their background, their age, like what they do, where they're from, just being open to everyone. A big part of what we try to do is fold more people into the psychedelic community and expand it, because I think the more people who open themselves up to these ideas, the more the culture shifts, and then the more policy and research and all that stuff will follow. So yeah, I think it's a big piece for us is changing the cultural perspective on it and trying to fold more people in. And then the second part was what doesn't work, or? Yeah,
what doesn't work? You have a lot of experience in building communities. So for those that might be interested in building community, on the flip side of that, what's not working?
In my experience, I found that we're a membership supported organization, so I found that we've tried to do members only events in the past, but interestingly enough, people in the psychedelic community don't seem to like any sort of exclusivity. They prefer events that are open to everyone and to broaden their networks and broaden their horizons. So I would say what doesn't work is trying to keep it too insular, maybe, because it's there's a lot of people who want to get in on it and join during the conversation.
Yeah, nice. Well, at this point in the panel, we've heard a lot about the hopes and the dreams. It feels pretty optimistic getting into the field, creating something new, and then also some of the challenges in this industry. But at this point, I'd like to really lighten the mood a little bit and play a game with all of you guys. For the audience as well, it's kind of like, have you heard Never Have I Ever? And like you raise your hand if you've done it kind of thing. All right, well, we're gonna play a little game of Never Have I Ever Psychedelic Edition. And when any of the speakers raise their hand, we're gonna ask you to kind of explain. We wanna hear what that experience was like, but I also wanna see hands raising in the audience too. You hear me? Okay, raise your hand if you've ever had to explain your work to people who didn't quite understand it at first, or have been asked, wait, is this legal? Hands at all? Yeah, that's a lot of hands. 1, 2, 3. Nima, I see yours is the highest, so can you kind of give us a good understanding of how did you explain it to them then?
I have a funny story about this. So I come from traditional immigrant parents who they don't drink or smoke anything. I never seen any of that in my house. And I try to communicate to them, like, starting in the cannabis space. And I tried to help them understand, plant medicine side, coming out as an economist, whatnot. But it wasn't until in the cannabis space that I got my first job in cannabis that they're like, okay, well maybe this isn't so bad. So then that was the first time they tried edibles. And then a couple years later, after working at Zendo, I was telling about what I'm doing. And so it's like, I guess this immigrant mentality is like, okay, well, it's paying you, then maybe it's not so bad. And then when I came back started working at Zendo, like over a couple of years, I came back from Burning Man and I offered to walk them through their first, sit with them for the first psilocybin journey. So I got them 2 blankets. It was a rainy day in Michigan. They're looking outside the window, and I trip sat for them. And I tried every way of expressing it academically, but it wasn't until they thought that it could be, if it's a job, then it can't be so bad. So.
Nice. Anyone else on the panel have a story too about their first time? If anyone said, wait, is that even legal? I think I actually got that today on walking in here even. Anyone else? All right, go Kat, go.
Yeah, when we ran our physical library and community center, people would come in all the time and we'd explain to them that we were a psychedelic library, an educational center, and that would be the first response. A lot of times people assumed that we sold mushrooms there or would ask if we did, and I had to explain to them in great detail that no, we sell books.
Amazing. Okay, we're gonna go on to our next one here. Raise your hand if your younger self ever thought you would land where you are right now, interested in a career in psychedelics, or even in the psychedelic field. At all? Yes? A couple? I see some confusing ones. Anyone have a thought on that? I know, Natalie, you said that you didn't think that you were gonna be in the psychedelic field at all, but...
I thought if it did happen, it'd be when I was old. I'm kind of old, but not that old.
You're not old, definitely not. Anyone else have a thought? I feel like some paths here were not very linear, where you kind of started in one space and then suddenly it clicked for you to be in another space. Does anyone remember that moment when they kind of were like, I'm gonna dedicate my life to this? I know, Gina, you spoke a little about it too. Yeah.
I would maybe preface by don't take this advice or don't take this as advice. So when I was younger, I really wanted to be a therapist. So I envisioned just, kind of more of a traditional clinical therapy role. And then obviously there's a hand in hand between psychedelic and mental health. But I honestly was terrified to tell my friends or family that I was interested in psychedelics. I thought that I would lose a lot of my lifetime friendships because of it. And it definitely did shape my ultimate social circle. But I mentioned prior that I was working in a genetics research lab. I was honestly miserable at my job. It was kind of like day-to-day lab experiments, as like mundane as you could get. So I would spend a lot of that time thinking about what I would rather be doing. I ultimately took the leap. I knew I wanted to go all in on psychedelic policy, even though that was like barely and still is like a very small career. So I quit my full-time job without having another job because I knew that it would be too distracting to have something else going on full-time. And I was like, if I'm gonna do it, I'm gonna go all in on it. And that was 2021, where I quit my full-time job, and about a month later, SSDP hired me part-time.
Ooh, love to hear that. Fiona, did you also have something to add?
I don't think that I would have ever thought as a raver in the late 90s
Yeah,
that
no raves.
I would have been at this spot now where I get to work with Rick Doblin and fighting to get these laws changed. Things are wild in this world. And I remember even just, having a relationship with mushrooms when I was in college, and really having profound experiences with them and realizing like how impactful it could be, and not necessarily wanting to do them in the kind of party hippie environment that was kind of happening around me. But I had no idea that there could be anything in this world that would bring me to psychedelics, because I'm not a researcher, I'm not a scientist, I'm not a psychiatrist. There was not even any other way, other than the fact that the culture behind psychedelics was something that I absolutely was connected to. Through the music, through the special events, through everything like that, I was very connected, but I didn't necessarily think that there would be a career in psychedelics. So it's something that's definitely happened over time, but I reflect back, I was at an event recently at Meow Wolf in Denver, and I was getting to see a band, Perpetual Groove, that I followed 25 years ago, and they're having their 25th anniversary show while I was out there for the PsyCon conference. And I had just met this gentleman who ended up being the Aspen Psychedelic Society leader. He volunteers for Fireside Project. Little did I know he also was the keyboardist of Perpetual Groove and was playing at Meow Wolf that night. So here I am in the audience at Meow Wolf, seeing him up there, now almost 46 years old, feeling my life be full circle. Like in this moment, looking to my left and my right, to members of the psychedelic space that are there with me, remembering where I was as that 20-something-year-old, wondering how I could possibly have this good feeling last forever, bring this with me into my professional career. And there I was at Meow Wolf dancing the night away. So there's something really powerful. I know that the rave scene can kind of get a bad rap a lot, but I think that the kind of fundamental principles of peace, love, unity, and respect are something that carried with me in everything that I do, including in my professional career.
Yes, go Plur. If you don't know what Plur is, go Plur. Okay, raise your hand if someone has ever heard you do psychedelics and may have assumed that you're a full-time hippie who wears a tie-dye. Perhaps. Yeah, some stigma and misconception out there. Kat, I see your hand raised. Would you like to tell us what happened?
I have those conversations all the time with people because I'm extremely open, and I am a full-time hippie who wears tie-dye. So.
Woo! Nice, I love that. Okay, so before we move into audience questions, I just want to leave our attendees with some actionable steps for the future. In just a couple of words, if anyone here is interested in getting into the field of psychedelics or may already be, what would you suggest, again, 1, 2, 3 words that they prioritize right now? And this is open for the entire panel.
Meeting new people and taking a chance on that seemingly crazy idea that you have.
Meeting new people, taking chances. Nice.
Not being afraid to make mistakes.
Courage.
Show up like you did today, and keep showing up in places that you might even feel uncomfortable in. Show up and introduce yourself. Sometimes it's just about asking. Go to the person that maybe you wish could be your mentor and ask if you could sit with them or have lunch with them or have coffee with them. I think I kind of maneuvered my way into this world because I didn't have any mentors when I was younger, and now that's why I hold my relationship with SSDP so special, because now I get to be a mentor for other young people when I didn't have one my own. So you can look for your mentors now, because someday you'll be mentors too, and you'll look back and realize that you gave. So show up, keep showing up, and don't be afraid to be in rooms that you feel like you might not need to be in or shouldn't be in, those are the rooms you probably should.
I'm going to second that. Show up. And for two additional reasons. One, time moves very fast. So, right, like we seem fancy because we started this 10 years ago, but you guys are, like in 10 years, you're going to seem like legends to the next cohort, right? So just by showing up, that is how you get in the room. The second thing, and reinforcing what Gina said, is that the reason why everything Gina said is really possible is because by the very nature of the people in this community, in our space, they're more likely to listen to you. They're less transactional. They're probably more emotionally, spiritually, psychologically aware. So more than any industry, you're more likely to find an ear that responds to your honest and authentic approach to showing up. So just keep showing up.
That's beautiful. Go for it, Natalie.
It's important to know what your own strengths are, so get to know your own strengths and weaknesses, and then have a cozy up to some of the problems that we're sort of facing in our various little nooks of this field, right? And sort of the better you understand what the problems are, the better you might know how to apply your strengths and where those strengths might make the most difference.
Nice. Okay. Alejo, do you have any thoughts on what anyone should prioritize right now?
I think only not to forget to weave all of the reality that is in the visions with this physical reality, beginning by how we are and how we are doing, so that from there we can weave ourselves with everybody else.
Beautiful. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please help me thank our wonderful speakers with a round of applause? So good. At this time, we're also going to open up the floor to the audience. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I think we're going to have some people run with microphones at this moment. I might pass this to you. Does anyone have a question for our speakers?
Thanks so much, that was amazing. My question has to do with where we are and harm reduction and moving forward, kind of what was spoken to earlier. I'm a psychotherapist. I've been at a large organization. I teach graduate students. Personally and professionally, I get asked, I feel like weekly, about psychedelics and safety and contraindications, mental health, trauma, physical health. And I know we could go on Instagram right now and scroll and find information, but for the experts up here, what do you know about the number one red flag, shall we say, and maybe yellow flags for someone who's considering exploring psychedelics? And the different compounds, say a DMT versus a 5-MeO DMT versus an LSD versus an ayahuasca. I'm curious what like the latest research really says, broken down, so we can be more informed. Thank you.
Nice. Love that.
I'll answer some of that. So there's still a lot we don't know. I was just at a meeting the other week where we were sitting around in a room with like 30, 40 people trying to come to some consensus about how to run clinical trials that involve psychedelics and like what are the real contraindications. So, and the theme that emerges that we're right now, we're just sort of like pushing the boundary that was previously set as like, well, this is safe. You know, like in all the clinical trials that came out on the earlier side, it was, you know, if you have a personal history of bipolar disorder or psychotic disorder, you shouldn't do this. But now we have like clinical trials specifically looking at psilocybin in people with bipolar and MDMA in people with schizophrenia, and so we're starting to study those things. It's all about just sort of like understanding whether, you know, what risk factors a person might have. It sounds like you probably know a bunch of them, right? Like some of the sort of bipolar or psychotic spectrum illness, or a family member, first degree or second degree, who has that. There's some medications also that are kind of like more concerning than others. Lithium in particular, if a person's on lithium, that's probably something they shouldn't be on if they're thinking about trying a psychedelic. 'Cause a combination could be like life-threatening potentially. A lot of reports online of people ending up in the hospital, having seizures in the ICU, that sort of thing. But I don't know, it's evolving, and to, you know, if a person's on a medication, ideally they should be talking to whoever's prescribing it, right, to sort of understand what exactly the risks might be of proceeding with whatever they're thinking about, or what the risks might be of like trying to come off of their risky medication, that sort of thing. I think your other question was about like something about which drugs. Yeah, I mean, like the classic psychedelics maybe are a little bit different than like MDMA and some of the other compounds that are from slightly different classes or work a little bit differently. Things like ibogaine, you know, certainly have like some cardiac risks that we're still trying to understand. Like on the one hand, we haven't done research on that in the States in like 30 years. On the other hand, you go across the board, there's people dosing ibogaine like many, many times a day and seemingly having outcomes that are good enough that other people come and they're interested in doing it. There's still a lot we don't know. We all got to do our research, and it probably speaks to the need for greater, like, better educational materials out there. Yeah.
Really quick answer, fantastic question. I got this last Saturday on a panel as well. And what I would say is, you know, the government's obviously catching up. Don't believe everything you hear on social media, but if there were places that I would trust, look at places like, go to the MAPS website, look at Psychedelic Assembly, look at Sensible Students, and come to Zendo Project and look on the websites, and they'll either have information or point you to places. But right now it is the Wild West, and start with the places that you know you can trust and see how you can find other resources from there.
One quick more resource. The Psychedelic Safety Institute is a website that you can go to. They hosted a summit in Berkeley last March. Gina and I were able to attend. They pulled together a bunch of different people from the psychedelic space. They pulled researchers, everybody from policy to all the different facets. The website does have some password protected pages, but it's only because they didn't run, like, this is not done by robots and AI. Like, it's all gonna be backed by white papers and research papers. So everything that's gonna be published on the site. So it's almost ready to go. But there's a couple things. There's a contraindication page on there. So you can actually go through per compound like you're talking about, and it'll show, and then it'll link to that research that's being done on those compounds. So PSI is going to be a good resource there. They're also building a complete ecosystem map of everybody in the psychedelic space, and then it's broken down kind of by industry facets. So that's also good when you're trying to look for a job, to kind of understand the landscape of what the psychedelic space is. And then if you are in an organization or TCIPS isn't listed on there yet, then you can actually go on and add your organization to this ecosystem list. But I'm going to guess that once this website gets launched, that we're gonna see a lot of people using that as the resource, because it is a tool that's been kind of crowdfunded by the entire community to input all of this information so that we have a resource. In Pittsburgh, what we typically do, like our TRIPS events, we work with the Psychedelic Pharmacy Association, and we make sure that we have a pharmacist there with us at our events to answer questions, so that it's not so public. But if someone knows, hey, we have Andy here, Andy can go off to the side and actually talk with folks at the parties if they have some specific questions about the drugs that they're on. But keep an eye on Psychedelic Safety Institute.
Thank you, those were amazing points. I highly recommend checking out all these resources. I just want to highlight another safety issue that at least I see a lot, is that people are weaning off their antidepressants pretty rapidly in order to take a psychedelic, and that's probably because their own physician doesn't have a recommendation for how to do that, and there really isn't an official protocol. So also for people who are going to retreats to do ayahuasca or other things, they're just being advised to stop taking your medication 2 weeks or so prior, and that's a big issue that we see, is like destabilization. So I would love to see if, you know, at some point our research experts or others are able to help develop some type of protocol for getting off of your antidepressants and weaning onto some type of psychedelic. But I think a lot of people are self-experimenting, so I highly recommend, even if you're not able to see a psychedelic therapist in person, just trying to call or email someone to get some type of advice or feedback on, you know, how you can best do that.
Well, add one thing on that topic, right? So I think there's an idea floating around that like, oh, you have to be off of your antidepressants to get any kind of effect. So we had a survey study that we did to try to look at that question. And the bottom line is like, there's, you know, people worried about like serotonin syndrome if they're on an SSRI or SNRI. That doesn't really seem to be a real risk. There might be some greater likelihood of like reduced subjective effects, which doesn't always actually even translate to reduced therapeutic efficacy. So there's a lot we still have to understand about it. But I was surprised that the numbers weren't higher, that like people who are on an SSRI or SNRI, more likely than I was expecting, maybe like half the time they said actually, you know, the drug that I took gave me about what I expected in terms of like an effect subjectively. And there are at least a few trials where people are not weaned off of their SSRIs, SNRIs, and seem to get some kind of benefit from the treatment. So we're still learning to understand it. Like not every psychiatrist or prescriber is gonna like be the best versed in this. But the data's out there, and I think these resources you folks mentioned are probably a good place to start for looking. Yeah.
We have any other questions out there? I think Isaac is running over in the back.
Hi everyone, so first of all, thank you so much for this very inspiring panel and for sharing your wisdom with us. I'm curious to know, let's say it's 10 years from now, what is in your varied perspectives, in your area, in your field, let's say it's the best case scenario, what would that look like? And bonus, if you want, what are some steps that people who are interested in the field or are already in the field that they can take that will support that?
I'll present a vision. I say vision, right? In the clinical world, it would be nice if we had some compounds that are approved for use, and that there were high quality, careful, thoughtful clinicians out there who were working in teams to help people, and that we also had some more research going to better understand the possible harms and risks that might come about in folks who use these drugs. And maybe even like working together with groups that have been using these substances for substances like what we were talking about for millennia, right? To sort of understand the kind of safety protocols that have come about over all that time. And that we have like accountability and transparency, right? Because there certainly are harms that can come about even between like, you know, therapists who are bad actors and things like that. So nice, safe, transparent environment for people who are looking for care in the clinical world.
Yeah, 10 years from now, I'd love to see more funding and resources pulled into community-based organizations that support people who come out of these psychedelic experiences and need to integrate them into their lives. You know, through finding other people, through access to art and education and literature and all these things. I feel like with the psychedelic world right now, a lot of the funding is being poured into the research and pharmacological side of things, but the community aspect to me is critical for actually embedding the insights and the benefits of psychedelics into people's day-to-day lives and truly making a difference in the world.
I think we have time for maybe one more question. So if it's burning, yes, I saw your hand first. Georgia, yeah.
Well, thank you all for what you've come here to share. And well, as all of you probably on Saturday, I woke up with the same news, Trump speaking. My algorithm was really good and showing me everywhere I was going. And when I heard him speaking, actually I guess the part that made me really happy was when he said he would be willing to try it. I hope he does. But truly my question here, I would like to ask Alejo, and also any of you that would like to answer. What do you have to share about when we isolate a molecule from the full plant spectrum? if you were speaking about the symbols and the stories and the dances and the songs as main pillars, you know. And I would like to know what happens when we isolate this molecule, and is there, like, what would be the positive aspect of it? And then also wanted to know what would be lost, you know? And I also want to put a little other seed here because I think it's important. Once I went on research that day asking about this whole thing about isolating molecules, one of the things that I read was that when you isolate a molecule, it's actually easier to patent. So I want to put this out here, and just I would like to hear what is that you have to say about this, and how do we feel about this? You know, how does this come in the table? Gracias.
From our thought, we like to understand the relationship with reality, understanding that it is given by codes which we call the law of origin. From there, it is that we understand that the relationship with these forces has evolved, it has transformed through thousands or millions of years. So at least from our tradition, without saying that something is good or bad or right or wrong, simply sharing our perspective. When that totality is broken and we only grab one part of it, it is left incomplete. It can no longer have a real relationship with everything that is given there. Through a very profound intelligence of evolution, everything is very well, fits very well. I heard someone recently that spoke about before ayahuasca ceremonies, he would take pills that would cut off the purge, the vomit. And he was saying that it's so marvelous that he no longer has to vomit. For us, it was so weird to hear that. How in the easiness of the comfort, we lose the real essence of things. Much of what in these contexts is spoken of as risks is what in our communities is valued and potentiated many times. We look to be able to enter into a movement of the body that can truly remove and readjust things. Personally, I do not believe that human intelligence is at the level of the intelligence of nature. And to want to isolate components is to not comprehend the weaving of everything that is behind it. When we take a plant, it's not only the main alkaloid, the one that is working. It has a lot of other, not just alkaloids, but also nourishment, forces, minerals, vitamins, energies, which are all woven within that wisdom in order to allow us healing. Without wanting to go on too long, I only remember a moment in which someone gifted me a dropper of very pure LSD. He told me to drink it and whatnot. I felt curiosity. And there was a ceremony that we had with our community, and I placed it there to feel it, to pray it, and to see what's up. Suddenly, a medicine that was supposed to be soft began to go up in force and go up.
ya no podía
Suddenly, I could no
realidad.
longer perceive this reality.
Sí, ya no sabía cómo
I
moverme.
did not know how to move.
Me empecé a asustar.
I began to get scared.
Y en ese momento subió un
And
poco
at
más.
that moment, the force came up a little bit more.
Sí, y en ese susto
And
sentí una
in
fuerza
that
que me
fear,
decía,
I felt a force that told me,
¿quieres más?
do you want more?
Y yo decía, no.
And I said no.
Y subía un poco más.
And it would go up a little bit more.
Y así me tuvo un rato.
And like that, it had me for a while.
Sí, yo seguía diciendo no y
I
seguía
continued
subiendo
to
más.
say no, and the force kept going up.
Y de repente la visión me mostró esa
Suddenly,
botellita
the
de
vision
LSD
showed me that bottle of that LSD,
y me preguntó, ¿no?
and it asked me,
Entonces, ¿para qué quieres más?
so why do you want more?
Si quieres más,
If you want more,
yo te puedo dar más.
I can give you more.
Y en ese momento se rompió
And
la
in that
visión, y
moment,
estaba
the
yo en una
vision
playa,
broke up, and I was in a beach.
miraba una isla.
I was looking at an island.
Sí, estaba esa fuerza que me decía,
There was this force that was telling me,
el trabajo es llegar a esa
the
isla.
work is to get to that island.
Si usted es un buen nadador,
If you are a good swimmer,
entonces salte y nade, ¿no?
so jump in and swim.
Y la marea estaba muy brava.
The
muy
tide
fuerte.
was very strong.
Y yo di un paso atrás, ¿no?
I took a step backwards,
Sí, y me decía esa fuerza,
and that force told me,
estos son esas sustancias
these
sintéticas.
are those synthetic substances.
Miré hacia un lado
I looked to one side,
y había un bote.
and there was a boat.
So, me dijo, si sabe
It
remar,
told me, if you know how to row,
sí, si sabe cómo bordear las
if you
corrientes,
know how to navigate the current,
bien pueda, y vaya a la isla.
do it and go to the island.
Yo me acerqué, sentí
I
toda esa
approached,
fuerza
I
del mar,
felt
sentí
the
que
whole
me iba a
force of
voltear,
the
¿no?
ocean and felt that I was gonna tilt over.
Y dije, no.
And I said no.
Y esa fuerza me dijo,
That
"Estas
force
son las
told
plantas".
me, these are the plants.
Sí, y luego me volteé a ver al otro lado,
And then I looked at the other side,
y estaba esta otra canoa,
and there was this other canoe,
pero con un canoero.
but with a person to row.
Sí, y estaba ahí este ser con
This
un remo
being
grande,
was
¿no?
there with a great rowing stick.
Y yo dije, aquí sí.
And I said, okay, this one.
Sí, cuando me subí hacia esa
When
canoa,
I
¿no?
got into that canoe,
Sabía que ese
I
ser me
knew
iba a
that
llevar,
that
¿no?
being was going to take me.
Y ahí esa fuerza me
And
decía,
there the force told me,
estas son las ceremonias.
these are the ceremonies,
Sí, no solo las plantas.
not just the plants.
Los viejos nos dicen
The
que cuando
elders
tú
tell
cortas
us
una
that when you
planta,
cut a plant,
la planta se muere.
the plant dies.
Sí, y lo que cambia a una
And
ceremonia
what
de
changes
simple
a
tomar una
ceremony
planta
from simply taking a plant
es que en las ceremonias
is
se
that
sabe
in the
hacer la
ceremonies we know to do the magic
magia para que esa planta no muera y
so
su
that that
espíritu
plant
siga
does
ahí.
not die and its spirit can continue to be there.
Pues en ese momento yo tomé
So
esa
in that
decisión
moment
clara.
I took that clear decision.
Yo quiero trabajar
I
de esta
want to
forma.
work in this way.
Y no quiere decir que
It
ninguna
does
de
not
las
mean
otras
that
esté
any of the
mal.
other ways is wrong.
Simplemente esta es mi forma.
This is simply my way.
Para los que sean buenos
For
nadadores,
those that
buenos
are good
remadores,
swimmers and good rowers,
pues estará bien, ¿no?
it will be okay.
Sí, pero en nuestra tradición,
But in our tradition,
el aislar las cosas
isolating things
es algo que luego se
is
refleja
something that
en nuestra
later on
estructura.
reflects into our structure.
Y empezamos a aislarnos
And we
nosotros
begin
también.
to isolate ourselves as well.
Entonces nos gusta trabajar con
So
todo
we
lo que es
like to
completo,
work with everything that is whole
porque estamos rezando
because we are praying
para volver a ser una
to
humanidad
return to
completa
be
una
a
vez más.
whole humanity once again.
Sí, para poder
To be
retejer
able
lo
to
destejido de
reweave
una
that which
sociedad
has been
enferma.
unwoven in a sick society.
Entonces por eso nos gusta trabajar con lo que
So
está
that is
completo.
why we like to work with what is complete.
Eso podría decir.
That's what I could say.
100% agree with Alejandro's point, and taking it from a like economics and public policy perspective, the unfortunate truth is isolating these molecules in our current form of capitalism is kind of inevitable, right? You're gonna have the pharmaceutical companies going to try to distill these community plant tools into their single essence. They'll try to capitalize on it. This is the commodification of everything is inevitable, at least under our current form of market systems. But the the important thing to know is that that pattern happens with everything. And it is our responsibility to make sure that we approach things with its totality. So just like we've been blessed with a myriad of food options in the world, right? You have some people that will cook for themselves. You have some people that will go out to a really nice restaurant. And then there's some people who are okay with McDonald's, right? And just like these plant tools, you're gonna get what you put in. And it is a simultaneously really important responsibility of everyone in this room to know that difference while not judging, right? People might be going through their own thing, but in order to maximize the experience and the healing opportunity of these plant tools, we're gonna have to acknowledge that, like the duality of things, that something can be commodified into its single molecule, but also how you want the tool to help you and those that you're interacting with will depend on how much you're willing to put into. And we are too.
Thank you, Nima. That's beautiful. Can I get another round of applause for these amazing speakers? All right. Before we close this container, I just want to say a couple things. First and foremost, thank you. Thank you for being with us here today. We are so honored and humbled that you probably traveled a very far way to be here with us. For those of you in the audience that are Teachers College students, can you actually raise your hand? Keep them raised high for a second. Get one of them. They can show you where the next part of our social is going to be, because it is a long ways. It's not that long, but it is a bit of a windy road to get there. So if you saw one, grab them. With that, Alejo, can you please close this container for us, and we'll move on to the social part. Thank you.
Just praying so that our wills can continue to be lit in the fire, so that we may continue with the will to explore, to learn, to remember. May we never forget to co-create in the difference. I pray so that the seeds of this thought, of this idea of psychedelia, may find a firm root, so that the tree can grow for many generations ahead of us. I pray so that we never forget to pray. From this gratitude, with this whole encounter of diversities here, I ask the Great Mother to cover us with her quilt, and like this we may advance. Ayllu.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you once again to our speakers. Chauvel and Isaac, can you please come up for a moment? And everyone else, you are free. You can stand up, get a stretch. The next part of this section is over in the main building. Thank you.